Sometimes I have, of course, young professionals and they're like, oh, I would like to work in pharma industry, but I don't want to do the pharmaceutical studies. And I'm like, but at the end of the day, it's just 6 years.
Well, to say that to somebody when they're 18, it's like
I know, but then
a third
in
of
the
your life.
grand scheme of things, if you put this in the context of a lifespan.
Yeah, but can you do that when you're 18? I was like 18 and you say, I got to do this for 6, 7 years.
I know 6 years sounds like an eternity, right?
Yeah.
But in the grand scheme of things, it's not.
Have you ever noticed that LinkedIn is not an accurate representation of who people really are? Welcome to Season 2 of Leadership Lab, the show where I take you with me as we do a deep dive on some of the most interesting personalities in the life sciences industry today. In order for us to do so, I need you to unlock your phone and just tap the bell. The goal of this is to inspire the next generation of leaders, to create value for them and really tell the stories that will allow you to get where you're trying to get to in your career. You ready? Let's go. Welcome to the Leadership Lab. My name is Maurice Thornton, and today I'm joined by Neila Benabadji. Neila is a VP regulatory for the company Cytokinetics. Neila, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Maurice. Very happy to be here.
Neila, as we usually do, I want to actually first kind of talk to you a little bit about what you do today. Like, what is your actual job?
So as you mentioned, I'm the head of regulatory affairs at Cytokinetics. I lead the regulatory function outside of the United States here in Europe. I joined the company, I was hire number 4. So my role joining the company at a stage where the company was preparing for its first marketing authorization applications worldwide. So my role was to help or lead that process of the first marketing authorization application in order to have a commercially approved product in Europe, but also to build a regulatory infrastructure in the various European countries. And that's kind of built up from scratch to allow our products to be commercialized in each and every country we want to launch in a regulatory compliant manner. In addition, we have a pipeline, and my role is to provide regulatory input, advice on regulatory strategies for the products in development.
Okay, we're going to get into all of that because one of the things we get a lot of, we work with a lot of regulatory people, a lot of regulatory functions, and people are always asking us, even at the start of their career, what does it mean? What is it, right? And I really look forward to getting into actually what regulatory affairs is. But first, I want to talk a little bit about, where you came from, where you're from, how you grew up a little bit. So where were you born?
I was born in Algeria.
Okay. You moved then?
Yes, we then moved to France,
okay.
Studied there, graduated as a PharmD, specialized in drug development and international regulatory. And then I directly moved. My first job was in regulatory affairs.
Okay.
Directly moved. I started with Pfizer in the UK, and then I moved to Bayer, Ipsen. That was in France. Then I moved to Switzerland, where I worked for many years in Basel for Novartis. And then after that, I made, so you can see a lot of the big portion of my career started in big pharma. And then I took the leap to the fascinating world of biotech almost 5 years ago, I think.
So I'm going to take all of this apart. I'm keen to understand kind of the motivations for each change and why you chose what you chose. But tell me what you were like as a kid.
Yeah.
Like, were you scientific as a child already, or did you have other interests? Music, I don't know, sports. What were you like?
I was really enjoying studying.
Okay.
I know that doesn't really sound like fun, but I was a kid extremely curious, I guess, intellectually. So I loved mathematics, I loved physics. And I think what I loved the most is everything that had to do with argumentation, being able to build our arguments in reality. I grew up wanting to be a lawyer. It's funny.
Physics lawyer.
Yes, physics lawyers.
Okay.
You can think like these are two different aspects, but it's almost kind of looking into the logic of the thing, like
Yeah, sure,
kind of going at the logic from the right beginning. Lawyer, just because when I was a kid, it's funny. I was my favorite shows was like jury shows
Oh,
where like you have
what do you
case.
have no, I'm thinking of Judge Judy. I don't know if you know that. That's like an American one where they each one defend, like they're basically fighting with each other. But you're talking about shows where
So it's like when I was like
or like John Grisham books
in
or
the
something.
80s, right? No,
Okay.
so like every day there was this show at the same hour because we didn't have like
No,
right.
on Netflix, yeah.
And then there was a case.
Mhm.
And then you have two parties defending the case. And I was just always fascinated about what is the defense strategy going to be? Like, how are they going to organize it? And I was finding myself like going back and rewriting it. Like, how would I do it if it was me? Like, that was how I used to spend my time when I was bored, to be completely honest. And so, I was more on the maybe intellectual side than the sporty side. I wouldn't call myself sporty or athletic at all.
No, not at all. Nothing.
To this day, to be completely honest.
Okay, fair.
Well,
Games, anything like any other extracurriculars, like hobbies?
I was the eldest of three,
Okay.
two working parents. So I was doing a lot around the house, helping my mother already at a very young age. Taking care of my sisters. They never like it when I say that, but it is a reality.
Okay.
So
they're watching,
I think I've been kind of having a lot of house responsibilities at a very young age.
Yeah, but I think that's probably massively beneficial. I mean, I couldn't do laundry when I moved out of my house. This was never.
I could do a lot of things by the time I lived alone.
Well, you never did sports. I still don't do laundry because every time I would buy a sweater for lots of money, and I'd be like, "Yeah, cashmere is so nice," and like maybe two, and then I would forget, and I'd wash it hot, and it would shrink. And anyway,
my way to make money when I was a student was, you see, again, the same theme was to give courses to students. So like students who needed like help with mathematics or physics or
so tutoring.
Yes.
I mean, I tutor as well.
That was my way to make money when I was a student. So
okay, so high school or like coming through, elementary school up to high school, you were more on the science topics in school. It was more math, physics, these kinds of things.
Math, physics. I wasn't the science. I was good, but it wasn't my forte, let's say.
Yeah.
But I mean, I wasn't bad at it, but I wasn't as passionate about it as I was with mathematics or physics.
Okay.
But as I was saying, my both parents are are physicians, so
okay.
Yeah,
so
there is an influence there, of course, some way. Not just my parents, actually, in my broader family, I have a lot of doctors, ophthalmologists, surgeons.
What about, your sisters? Are they doctors?
They're not.
Okay, so.
None of us.
Interesting.
None of us.
Interesting. Okay. And did you ever want to be? You were like, oh, like that's what my parents are doing. It just didn't appeal.
That is the one thing I didn't want to be.
Fair. Okay. Fair enough. So then you did you start out studying pharmacy right away? So that was like first year university was pharmacy.
Right away, yes.
Me too. I started in pharmacy, 3 years. Then I dropped out. I switched to toxicology. I just thought it was more broad and then I worked in a pharmacy.
Right.
Practical. And then I was like, oh no. And nobody told me there was other things. I just thought I've got to be a pharmacist. And I worked at this pharmacy and I was like, I can't do this.
I understand.
And so then I went to the professor and explained like what I actually really like. And he's like, you should either do pharmacology or toxicology. And so I switched in the third year. But sorry, it's not about me. Not about me. Yeah, I had 3 years of pharmacy under my belt. But
we have a lot in common.
Yep. Okay, but you were right. So how did you decide before you went, I'm going to go study this?
Let's be honest. You get influenced by the environment you grow up in, right? So a family with a lot of doctors, I think there was that natural push for me to go there, but I really didn't want to. I just didn't see myself like working in a hospital environment or in a clinic environment. It's just like I knew I wouldn't want to do that.
It was like me in the pharmacy. Yeah.
I also knew I wouldn't want to be in a pharmacy.
Okay.
And so, but I was like, I'm open to kind of doing something adjacent to that.
Right.
So I am willing to be able to kind of join a business in healthcare that ultimately does support the patient, because it is super rewarding to be able to kind of help patients, save lives. It's just like there are other ways. I thought that's what the discussions I had with my parents. There are other ways to contribute to the healthcare system. And, I started having conversations with people, and I think I then very quickly came to the conclusion that I would like to join pharma industry. So
when was that?
So that was...
What age were you?
I was 18.
Okay, so this was all before you went to study?
Yeah.
And
before I went to study, I knew I was going to go to pharma industry.
Okay, very clear. So you had a plan. Who did you talk to?
Well, number one, I have also members in my family who are pharmacists.
Okay.
Right? Who were working in pharma industry.
Okay.
And so, not in regulatory affairs, I'm not going to lie. But at least that was an eye-opener that there are, again, other ways to contribute that is not being a medic, that is not also being in a pharmacy, because I also didn't picture myself necessarily doing that. And that is not being in the lab. And so when I got to know about, the pharma business, medication and what is you can't treat patients without medication. So that's how the idea started to kind of stem in my head.
No, I mean it's interesting to have the perspective already.
I had that sort of first thought, but of course I digged further, because I knew very clearly that the path I'm going to choose, and that's something that characterized me very much. Like when I make a decision, when I realize that this is going to be like a life-changing decision,
right,
I do a lot of research. I want to make sure that I'm making always the most educated decision. But once I make it, then I'm full in. And so, that transition of what studies are you going to go in, I took it extremely seriously, very, very carefully. I listened to my parents. I listened to in my environment. I took all, and then I kind of made my own decision.
But regulatory wasn't on the horizon just yet?
No.
Okay.
Pharma was industry, not regulatory at the time.
Okay. So then went to study.
Mm-hmm.
Was it what you expected?
It was better. It was much better than I expected, because pharmaceutical studies, it's so diverse, so many disciplines. I loved all of them. It goes from studying, I remember in the first year, you study, botanic, you study stats, you study histology, pharmacology, through the years, right? Toxicology, right? This is just for you. You study chemistry, and then towards the end of the curricula, you start to go deep into each area. So immunology, cardiology, not as deep, of course, but like that, you're able to understand the mechanisms in these therapeutic areas. And I told you I am very much like intellectually curious.
Yeah.
So I loved it, actually. So I was happy that I took that path.
It's very nice. I mean, you're clearly, visibly very passionate about it. And it's not that often I get somebody in here, or even, I mean, I interview people for a living, that I hear this kind of thread running through childhood up till, you're in university, and you say that I went to study pharmacy. It was even better than I thought it was going to be.
Yes,
Okay.
I was extremely fueled,
Yeah.
during that my studies. I was completely fulfilled. Yes, it was a lot of work, but it didn't feel that way for me.
Yeah.
I loved every part of it. Wow.
Amazing. I mean, that's not often the case. I think you have to be. There's certain moments, I think, in your life where you realize, like, oh my God, this is something I'm so interested in, and I want to gravitate towards it, and hopefully you have a path to get there. Not everybody does.
Yeah.
I mean, I clearly remember mine when I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to study. But it was away from, like, I was into math and physics as a kid, like as an interest point. But when I tried to go down that road a little bit more, I was like, okay, what does it come out to? For me, it was going to be engineering.
Yeah.
And I remember I went to tour a school for first year engineering, and they showed me a book, and the book was like this thick, and the title was Concrete. And I was like, I don't know if I can do this.
But I also sometimes hear that, and I find it. So sometimes I have, of course, young professionals, and they're like, oh, I would like to work in pharma industry, but I don't want to do the pharmaceutical studies. So,
Yeah.
and I'm like, but at the end of the day, I mean, it's just 6 years.
What, to say that to somebody when they're 18, it's like
I know, but then
a third
in
of
the
your life.
grand scheme of things, if you
Sure.
put this in the context of a lifespan.
Yeah, but can you do that when you're 18? I mean, I was like
I know.
18, and you say, I got to do this for 6-7 years.
But I guess that's my message that I give to, I know 6 years sounds like an eternity, right? Like,
Yeah.
but in the grand scheme of things, it's not. And you may find yourself enjoying part of it. So just don't limit yourself by thinking of just that time at university.
Okay, so you get there, you graduate, 6 years? Took you? Okay. When did the regulatory thing pop up?
Pretty late. So as I said, I liked everything. I knew I wanted to go to a pharma industry, so that didn't change for me. I would like a role where I will continue to be exposed to everything. So chemistry, like working in a lab seems to be the obvious path. I looked at that, and then I realized that, yeah, that's one aspect, and then CMC is also just one aspect.
What is CMC?
Oh, CMC is it's the manufacturing side of a product.
So chemistry, manufacturing,
manufacturing controls.
Yeah.
But it's like you don't get to see the clinical side.
Right.
And then there is the medical affairs side. But that one, you don't get to see the CMC side. You don't get to see the non-clinical side. So every time I was kind of speaking to these professionals or kind of doing my research, I'll be like, I didn't like the idea of being so boxed into something. And then you start to kind of question, okay, marketing authorization application, how does that work? And then I heard like, okay, so, to put a drug on the market, you need to have go through a marketing authorization application where everything around your product, all the data that you have generated through the product, is kind of presented to regulatory authorities as evidence for them to agree for you to place the product on the market. And I was like, oh, everything. Yeah, of course. And I was like, oh, wow, that's super interesting. And what function coordinates all of that? Oh, regulatory. Why don't you speak to some people in regulatory? And
okay,
that's how it started.
And how did you find those people in regulatory?
As I said, we were lucky that the school was arranging that, so you can have
like a
career
fair.
conversation, and then you ask these people. You're like, "What did you study?" Because at some point in the pharmaceutical studies, around the 6th year, you need to choose your master degree. So you're like, what was your master's degree? So I learned they did this and that. So I go and I search about that master degree, like what are the curriculum, what is it like, and then who are the people who studied there, what roles, what careers did they have. So that's how the kind of research started. And that's how I pinpointed exactly what master's degree I wanted to do.
Yeah, I was interested in that because you have the PharmD, but you also have a master's in
Yeah.
drug development. And that's a requirement of the PharmD?
Yes, to be
Okay.
able to
Specialize in one. Okay.
specialize.
Cool. All right. So then you were like, all right, I want to be in regulatory.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you said your first job was Pfizer in the UK.
Yes.
So how did you end up going from France to the UK? And why was this a conscious decision? And how did you get the job?
Right. So again, in the context of so first of all, I picked what master's degree I wanted to go to. Right, drug development. It was a very well-known one in Paris, where they had a lot of connection to pharma industry. So I think I was very lucky that I was able to enroll there. And then as part of that master's degree, what we used to have is like companies, big companies, including from the UK, would come to France. They will interview candidates and they will select, I think Pfizer had 2 positions at the time, and they would select candidates to take them to their UK office for a year, sort of a postgraduate.
Where was it?
Sandwich it was at the time,
I remember.
yes.
Yeah.
So I was selected, and yeah.
Any hesitation about kind of leaving home? Or was it like, get me out of here?
Oh, absolutely not.
Okay.
Absolutely not. I was like, I did not want to stay in France. I actually wanted the international experience.
Okay.
Well, also for the language, let's be honest.
Sure.
I think I had some good foundation in English, but I was far from being maybe fluent.
As you are today. Yes. Okay.
And the international experience, the getting out of the comfort zone, I think I wanted that.
Was there ever a moment when you were like, "Oh God, what have I done?"
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I think
give me the moment, because I can think of a few in my life, but
oh gosh, I think it was the moment where I think it was day 2 in the job. I'm in the UK, right? I am in Sandwich.
Yeah.
I speak English, but not like fluently. And then I have someone very senior come to me and ask me a question with like a Scottish accent. And asking me clearly, I think I understood him asking me to do something very urgent. And I didn't understand a single word the person said. Like, I was just like looking at, what is this person even telling me?
I think everybody has that with the Scottish. No offense to the Scots out there.
Well, I didn't know that at the time.
Okay.
Right? And so, yeah, I think that was the moment where I was like, oh my God, I'm here supposed to deliver a job. And clearly my language is not where it needs to be, my language level.
And was the job different than you expected it to be?
Completely. So, I come from those scientific studies, thinking like I'm going to kind of be involved in like the build out of a dossier. And actually I found out a different reality. So imagine you're like in that big pharma, Pfizer, probably the biggest at the time.
Yeah.
I was in the international regulatory strategy group. And it was at the time where the company had like 6-7 drugs to be registered a year. And so I was in a department where our role was to develop regulatory strategies in international market, all the way from, Asia, Latin America. And this was completely new to me. It's like, oh, is that what we also do in regulatory?
Okay.
And so, yeah, then you have to then factor in business cases. You have to factor in business decision. You have to factor in manufacturing sites. You have to factor in, I was exposed to conversations, business conversations. I was exposed to governance. I was exposed to local requirements. A lot of things that I did not even I didn't even know that these will be important to conduct a regulatory role. But even better, I loved it.
Okay, so you still loved it. It was like
it was again exceeding my expectations, if I'm being completely honest.
That's so nice.
Because then all of a sudden that sort of business and strategy and decision making, and again, understanding how the organization functions, how an organization at that scale builds priorities,
Mm.
but also understanding how a regulatory department functions.
Yep.
Like, okay, we were international, but there was US, there was Europe, there was CMC, there was labeling. I started to kind of build my map. And then that's the theme you will see me use a lot. It's like I started to understand that this is a much bigger world than what I had in mind walking in,
Yeah.
and that I was actually loving what I was seeing so far.
But you eventually left.
Yes, I eventually left. I had to leave. I had personal circumstances where I couldn't continue in the UK.
Okay.
And so I went back to France, and there I took a role at Bayer.
Okay.
And it was a very, very interesting time. It was just when there was Bayer acquired sharing.
Okay. Yep.
And
This
so
is
it was
late noughties. Or when was that? Like around 2008, 9, something like that?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. And so, the role was in Lille. And it was in the Shire offices, although it was Bayer that acquired, so they decided to keep the sharing location.
Yep.
So here I am again, joining. This time I was having like a sort of a dual role. So I had a local regulatory for France. And then I had like some projects. I was at a European role working with the headquarters
Okay.
in Berlin. And so
How is it going from like American to German?
it was an adjustment.
Okay. In what way would you say is like the most
um,
dramatic change that you noticed?
The level of detail, I think in the American environment, we keep things high level in our discussions, like team meetings,
Yeah.
or team discussions, or like you go into the detail when necessary. So you start with the big picture and then you dig, you zoom in.
If necessary.
If necessary, when the situation is required. I felt moving at a German company I felt like maybe the opposite. You start with the detail and then gradually So it's an adjustment.
Okay.
Once you understand it, you kind of adapt to it. But that's the other thing. Like not just in regulatory, but in every role, adaptability is key.
Yeah.
Like you have to observe your environment at the beginning.
So that's what you're doing strategically each job when you go in.
Every time.
Keep your mouth shut for a few months and just watch.
Observe, watch, try to understand the root cause sometimes of certain behaviors. And, depending as you grow up and as you grow up into leadership roles, you have to also ask yourself the question, what are the things that I will be able to impact? And what are the things where I will never be able to change? This is way bigger than me, even if I'm the most influential person in the room. Don't even go there.
Yeah. I mean, we've noticed where people fail is quite often when they go in with fixed ideas and they decide that they're going to speak up about them in the first couple of weeks and they have not understood the environment that they're in, and leads to friction and often an exit fairly quickly.
I mean, the reality is wherever you go, there is what you have in mind, what you want to achieve, and then there is the reality. If you're lucky, you do 100% of what you had in mind, but you have to accept
fantasy.
It is.
And then Ipsen was next, I think.
Yes.
Yeah? They just acquired a Swiss company yesterday.
I know.
Memo.
I saw that in the news.
Really cool. That's like 2 Swiss companies in like the last 2 months.
Yes.
Out of Schlieren. So interesting stuff.
I saw that. Yeah, so Ipsen, part of it is also because I wanted to return to Paris where I had my sort of social circle. And so, Ipsen, I joined there. It was also a great time because I think the regulatory function was also transforming. It was structuring like new sub-teams were kind of being formed, new leaders were being brought in. There was like great
That was
energy.
from Mark Garridell, I think, or who was it?
Yes.
He was.
Yes,
'cause
actually,
he was ex-Amgen, I remember, because he was at Amgen when I was there, and then he went on to be CEO
absolutely.
there.
So I guess when I joined, I can't remember how long it was with the old CEO, who
and
I
then,
don't recall the name. And then Mark Garridell joined.
Yeah.
And so, of course, that led to transformation, which is, that's also the interesting part I want people to know. Whenever there is a transformation in a company, regulatory affairs is very quickly impacted because it's so central. Like you don't have business and you don't have strategic growth if you don't have regulatory successes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Like this
Yep.
is just a reality.
Yep. All right. And then ultimately you made your way to Switzerland.
Right.
In the biggest one.
Yes.
So what was it like? I mean, because Ipsen at the time, I mean, it was a good company, decent size, but like nothing like the behemoth of Novartis. How was that different?
Novartis is giant pharma, and it's for a reason. It is giant. Well, and also I joined in Basel, right, where it is like the headquarter, the campus. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, that is a part of it that is extremely exciting. The regulatory function at Novartis has brought me a lot. It's a real community. It was a real community feeling. I mean, I felt very welcomed by that regulatory community very quickly. I think it's a company that kind of, I think, is very strong in the onboarding. So I remember I had 2 welcome days where I met with people from various functions, and we stayed, like we remained very close all throughout my time at Novartis. I mean, some of them are still friends today.
Okay.
But also within regulatory, I think the onboarding was good. And, it was also a community of individuals who have been through the same path or same studies.
Right.
So there was that connection there. I think it was a community that was genuinely supportive, to be completely honest. Now, that said, you do have that sort of around you is like those big teams, those big departments, and like you have to learn to navigate that.
Yeah.
It's like
it's half the job.
It is
Understanding who your stakeholders are, who do you need to have on your side to get something done.
Absolutely. I think it took me a year to completely make sense out of that. And to your point, when you're operating in such a large scale organization, like organization savviness is critical to be able to perform in the role, regardless of the level. I think it just is. And yeah, I think one way I kind of did this was, as I said, number one, to always observe and kind of always try to build the map. It's always the same pattern. My map of who does what, why. And also I think when things get too big and too scale, I try to kind of find a way to bring it to a scale that I understand and that I can manage. And so the scale that I understand I manage is the program. So, if you're working on a program, then if you focus on that and then you understand all the players and the stakeholders on that program, once you understand that very well, then if you amplify that, then you kind of extrapolate to like what it looks like at a whole franchise level. And then from a franchise level to a sort of a whole organization level, that sort of helps. But that understanding is critical.
Okay. Took you 8 years, I think it was, you were there roughly, something like that? 7, 8 years?
So I moved from, was supporting neuroscience at the beginning, and then I moved to immunology.
I want to talk about the next change you made. because you went from a really, really big company to a much smaller one.
Oh, yes.
Reata Pharmaceuticals. So I don't know how many they were at the time you joined. It was in the hundreds or maybe.
Yes, in the hundreds.
Yeah. So I happened to kind of be around when you were making that decision, and there was a lot of back and forth. So we talked to so many people who are, it's a complete unknown for them. Going to an American biotech, which doesn't have a product on the market, is pre-commercial. We have no idea if it's going to make it or not. What went into making the decision to change from a very safe, big environment where you're on the top programs, you have successes, the company's a priority, to going to something that like could be dead in 6 months? What did you think going through that?
Well, that's the reason it took a lot of back and forth, right?
Well, yeah, I mean,
to begin with, because to your point, I was at a stage where I was extremely happy at the company, and I think what really moved the needle at the end of the day is the extent of the impact I was going to make.
right.
So I told you I weigh every decision very carefully. So I think for that one, I was like, okay, take the next 3 years. What are the things I will be doing staying in my current role right now in the next 3 years?
Right.
And what are the things I will be doing in that other company in the next 3, regardless of the outcome, right?
True.
Right?
Yep.
Like, what are the things I'll be building here? What are the things I'll be building there? Put the outcome aside, because I was like, even if things fail, that experience, I will probably always find something, another role,
Yes.
right? But that experience of joining a company that was really in need of someone to kind of help transition from a development stage to a commercial stage into therapeutic areas where there was nothing.
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
There was nothing in Alport syndrome. There was nothing in Friedreich's ataxia. Friedreich's ataxia, it's a devastating disease. If I can contribute to making any of these drugs on the market and help and a company that would, in a way that is very impactful, because the company would need my skills, at the end of the day, why are we doing this job if it's not for these things?
Yeah.
Right? So I think that's what called me upon the position, is the impact, it's the kind of the purpose.
Yeah. I mean, you own much. I mean, Novartis, you've got a lot of people and you've got quite a narrow job. And then in most of the biotechs, you've just got all the jobs.
Right.
Like,
but and also, I think the other factor that I was like, okay, Novartis can do without Neila. Let's be honest.
They're still upset till today.
Yeah, they're still ruminating. but maybe at a company at Reata, I could make a kind of a difference.
Was it smooth sailing from the beginning?
No. It wasn't.
And was there like any big shocks?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So if anybody would be, let's say, if you had to prepare somebody to make the change that you made, big, huge global behemoth to very small, what would you say? Hey, be ready for this.
Be ready for what you're not ready. I guess that's the thing. Like, be ready and open-minded to surprises. And those surprises sometimes are going to come from the fact that there are things in big, large pharmaceutical companies where, things are prepared years in advance.
Yeah.
Risks are mitigated years in advance. It's not always the case at a biotech level. They are way more agile, and therefore there are a lot of things, a lot of shortcuts that are taken along the way. And to be honest, some of them, good for them that they took those risks, right?
Yeah.
But so this, you have to be kind of sort of have that open-mindedness. And so, I don't know, I give an example, not that I lived through this, but like if you arrive like time at submission and your pediatric plan is not already sorted, in big pharmaceutical companies, you will not find that.
Never happen, yeah.
Here is like, oh, all right, well, let's roll up the sleeves and try to fix that, and not in a year, but try to fix that in 6 months, or even less. So I think that's the mindset. But if you're gonna go in with the mindset, oh, you don't have that, then forget it. You're gonna have to delay and push everything by another year.
Yeah,
that's not the right mindset, I would say.
Brings us up today. I mean, you stayed in biotech. You took
Yes.
the next role at Cytokinetics.
Mhm.
So obviously, there's something that appeals to you about it.
Well, that's because also my first experience was successful. Who knows?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Who knows how it would have been?
Didn't always look like it would be, but ultimately
Yeah.
the company was acquired by Biogen.
Correct.
And you did not choose to go back to a Novartis or a Roche. So it's kind of a little bit telling.
Actually. Yes.
Maybe someday. I'm not saying it won't happen,
maybe
but
someday. I think despite the many challenges, the huge challenges, the reward of contributing to being part of a small organization where when there are also challenges and setbacks, it's amazing how the teams get close together, like genuinely.
Yeah.
It's amazing how the politics are completely put at aside because you're in a survival mode. It's amazing also how at that point real regulatory strategic thinking has to come into place because you're talking you're going to probably talking about binary outcomes,
right?
And here you have to give everything you have in terms of strategic thinking and regulatory navigation of health authorities. I feel like I didn't have enough of that after the acquisition. I wanted to continue in that space. And then the other thing to say with biotechs is that sometimes there is just so much science and innovation also.
Yeah.
And
yep. You're closer to it.
You're closer to the pulse of the company and the innovation. And there is no innovation without risk. The risk appetite is much sort of bigger. So all that sort of agility, science, innovation, I find myself really enjoying that. I wanted to continue there, to continue at least try to make an impact.
I want to talk a little bit more about regulatory itself in general as a job, because again, this can speak to the people who are just starting out or those in it already. When we try to headhunt people in regulatory roles when they are in like a submission cycle, they're like, yeah, look, I absolutely need to get this done. I'm not going to leave without getting this finished, which is not always common with other functions. But what is it like when it's, you've got a deadline, that you have to submit certain date? Is it complete insanity? How is the job? Does it go in ebb and flow? How would you describe that aspect?
What is regulatory affairs?
Sure, tell me
that. You deal with regulators around the world.
Yep.
Like, long story short, that's what you do. You need to make sure that you satisfy regulators such that your products are being placed on the market or also being maintained on the market. Things don't stop.
Sure.
The regulatory affairs job doesn't stop when the drug is on the market.
Yep.
The drug is, even in the drug in the market, there are sometimes new indications, there are post-marketing requirements. And therefore, what it means is that you are subject to timelines that are imposed on you by the regulators.
Right.
So that's a reality. And then, yes, we find ourselves a lot of the time dealing with deadlines. That's a real big component of the job, and timelines that you cannot push, and timelines that actually internally your company doesn't want to push because you don't want to delay approvals, right? So that's why you sometimes hear regulatory people kind of speaking or feeling like sometimes in a constraint. It's because you deal with external deadlines that are critical to the company. And your role internally is, well, number one is to guide the company as to what are the requirements in order to build submissions that I make it through. And that guidance doesn't start at the time you're doing your dossier. That guidance starts at the time before you design your trials.
Right.
So like
Yep.
regulatory is involved in throughout the entire life cycle. But it's also when it comes to submission time, your role is to ensure that you're going to submit on time. So your role is to ensure that you're coordinating all those cross-functional contributors.
Well, who has to contribute into a dossier?
So if I take, for example, original filing,
Mhm.
like a new NDA, so you would have your CMC colleagues.
Yep.
You would have your labeling colleagues. You would have your stats, safety, preclinical, pharmacology, clinical, talks. I've been leading submissions with 40 people, for example. Especially if, for example, you have also a device component
Yep.
built into it. I mean, we're talking huge cross-functional team with an outcome that is strategic and key for the company. And the regulatory function is the architect of kind of making sure that that happens in a quality manner, so that you're delivering a quality dossier that has a content that is aligned with the strategy that you've developed and that you've guided, and in a timely manner as well. So it's a lot of parameters to kind of play with.
So it's really very, very strongly coordinating function in terms of ensuring that those pieces of information that we need to include have to be there at the right time.
Absolutely.
And when it comes to strategy,
Mm-hmm.
how does it look for you to kind of plan out, hey, like, okay, we know they're going to want to see this. How can we put that together ahead of time? Like, is that something that starts from the very beginning, like when you're planning trials?
So here you're talking about the strategy of planning, which is important. The real regulatory strategy goes beyond that. It's about, as I said, let's say you're designing a phase 3 program. You want to design it in a way that ultimately, if successful, it gets your approval.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Otherwise. And so the real regulatory strategy in that example would be to be working very closely with your clinical colleagues, with your stat colleagues, to kind of guide as to what is it, that study that you're designing, what is the evidence that you need that study to generate for this to satisfy the regulators. So, and you base that based on understanding of guidelines, understanding of regulatory precedents, understanding of the therapeutic area as well. And so your role is to kind of be able to kind of have those conversations. And the one thing I also recommend people or regulatory professionals is there is a tendency sometimes to, keep that side of things to the clinical people, because like, oh, well, I don't understand the disease. Well, you have to understand it.
Yeah.
You do.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be able to elevate your thinking to a point where you're able to have sort of an on-par conversation with your clinical colleagues. Now, you will never be the special person, but you need to be able to translate that science into regulatory evidence to meet the requirements of the regulators. Or sometimes there are situations where, for various reasons, you're not able to generate that evidence, whether it's orphan disease or whether, your role is also to say, well, we're going to have a challenge here. If we don't do that, we're probably going to be challenged here. But this is what we could counter offer.
Right.
Your role is also to say, maybe then let's have a conversation with the regulators about this, about that. Okay. You also strategically guide when you talk to the regulators about what and what you do with their feedback. So
it can be insanity, I guess, at times.
It can.
So
Totally.
how do you, I mean, you have a family,
Mhm.
you work with the US,
Yes.
which, obviously stretches the day. How do you ensure that you have space for everything in your life?
Over the years, as you get experience, I think you learn to manage um, your energy, and you
Hmm.
learn to manage your priorities. You will learn to surround yourself with the right people,
Is this personally or at work?
both.
Okay.
I mean, to be completely honest, you need to surround yourself in your personal life. You need to have the conversations with your partner. I think your partner needs to be really understand the role you do, understand the constraints you're dealing with. I mean, there are times where I had those conversations with my child, even to kind of say, there's going to be that period of time where I'm going to be extremely busy if I know I'm having,
Yeah.
a big meeting, and have a support system at home. But the same holds true at work. Like you need to kind of make sure regulatory is a team. You need to
Yeah.
make sure you
Yeah.
have a good team. Now, I'm not saying you need to have always the top performance, because there are realities, but you need to understand, if you look at your portfolio, your program, what's coming in the next 2 years, what is the type of profile you're going to need, and you sort of balance that. So, I don't know, for example, you can say, okay, I'm going to have a lot of post approval activities. Maybe this is something that can be managed by that individual given that type of experience, but that part is going to be critical. I'm going to use that person who is more
Hmm.
experienced. So I think and then to manage your own energy as well. So,
Yeah.
when I know that we're going to embark into like big meetings internally or externally,
Yep. Yep.
there are also big discussions, sometimes difficult discussions. I need to make sure that I am going there with my right amount of energy, because that's where going to have the biggest impact. So I would say the way I manage that is, I am, number one, I am extremely mindful that this is how my job is, that my job requires constant trade-offs,
Right.
and that my job requires me to constantly use my judgment to kind of shift and that can
Yeah.
happen sometimes 2 times a week,
Wow. Wow. Okay.
and it's okay.
Yeah.
You have to kind of accept that too. So like, you have a mental agility when you are in that role that is constant, and you just have to accept it and deal with it. And uh, you know when it comes to deadlines imposed by health authorities, of course these are the priorities, and maybe the trade-off is, if there are some internal deadlines for, like, maybe then you have conversations internally to
So it's about communicating about that across
across
everybody, the
everybody,
family,
the
the work,
family,
the
your
extra. Well,
management.
yeah.
And also, you would be surprised the amount of education you have to do internally, exactly for what we're saying, like to also explain what you do to other functions,
Yeah.
whether
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah.
commercial or market access, or for people to also understand what you're kind of dealing with. So for people to constantly understand why sometimes you're not able to devote at that moment the attention that is needed. And so you have just to be open, communicate about it, accept it.
Anything that we didn't talk about that we should talk about?
Yeah, one thing that I really, you remember how I wanted to be a lawyer?
Yes.
Believe it or not, that part is, I feel fulfilled in the role I'm having today.
Yeah.
Reason being, if you think big picture about regulatory, and if, especially, when you reach a certain level of leadership, then your role becomes to build defense
Yeah.
strategies
Yeah.
for your product,
Like a science lawyer.
like a science lawyer,
Yeah.
before, a a jury.
You go in front of a court, kind of.
You go in front of a court, and
they
then
all sit at the desk and they have their microphones.
Well, there is a part of that, and then the evidence that you have is scientific evidence.
Yeah.
And then your role is to work with the team to use all that evidence to build a story that you present to experts to that will kind of decide and give an outcome. So you see, I didn't expect to kind of have that feeling.
Kind of full circle, yeah.
It feels like full circle. So that's a reason why I feel sometimes unfortunate that function is not always understood, particularly the strategic dimension that comes with it. But yeah, I would say exceeded all my expectations. And I know sometimes I'm asked, would you like to do something else? And I'm like, absolutely not.
Well, that's really, really great. I mean, to have such passion and interest and continuous development in what it is you do. So before we wrap up, I have a section that I call the mentorship minute. Right. And that's like saying, okay, if I could distill everything from me before I entered university, maybe when you were 18, or people who are earlier in their career, what's a piece of advice that you would give to them as they move on through their career?
You know, I think that comes back also to what I was saying. I would advise them to always, build the map, So if you're interested in that role or put it in a map, how does it fit into the entire business that you're wanting to go in? Once you are in the role, let's say once you are in regulatory affairs, you're junior, you're just started, you've been given project X, potentially maybe you're given something very small to begin with. It doesn't matter. Put that on your map. How does this project integrate into the big picture? How is it contributor to the bigger business? And do that all the time as you grow. Even when at leadership level, you need to continue to do that. And I feel that develops that sort of big picture and sort of develops that understanding of interdependencies that is key to success in regulatory and, to be honest, maybe in other roles as well.
Neila, thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Maurice.
Hey, thanks so much for listening. I really appreciate it. If you made it this far, I think you might have enjoyed this. And if so, please, if you haven't done so already, like, follow, subscribe, and rate us where possible. I'd really appreciate that. And another thing I'd also appreciate is if you could share this with somebody you think needs to hear it. The goal here is to inspire, and we need to spread the word. So anything you can do to help is much appreciated. I'll see you in the next lab.